hear me? Welcome back to our Tech Talk session. And this afternoon, I invited my teammate Ramesh and Visut, who will be online, to help explain some of the things that we do at AI Center to work with the industry. So, um, actually, I just want to say hi. I want this afternoon session to be more interactive. And if you guys have any questions or you want to get involved, you can drop a message in the chat. And then actually, I'll be reading the chat as we talk. So before we start, let's have everyone just type in the chat where you are. Are you at the office or studying or work from home or what country you're representing, right? That would be great if you guys can just drop it in the chat and we can take a look of our audience and get to know each other a little bit more. Okay? So in case you were not here this morning, my name is Tina. Um, I am the business development manager at AI Center, and I work pretty much with industries to try to develop some AI technology for them to be able to implement in their businesses, right? Oh, okay, at the office. Oh, some team members from AIT are here. Thanks, guys, for supporting. Yeah. So today we're gonna talk for about an hour, but I think it'll be like 40 minutes. And we're gonna open the rest of the time for you guys to ask any questions that you have on how we can get started on using AI in your business, even if it's not with us, even if you try to develop it yourself, and how to strategize with that. Okay? All right. So let's get started. Can I have my slides? Thank you. And today my hair is extra frizzy because the humidity. Oh, work from home in Bangkok. That's lucky. Actually, who has enjoyed working from home and who has not? We should make a poll about that, right? Because it really affects how we interact with people and how the office atmosphere works. So you can also drop that in the chat as well. How about you, Ramesh? Work from home?
Actually, I stay in AIT, so the whole AIT is my home. So yeah, but it was fun to have a quiet space sometimes.
Okay. So I will get start. I will talk about 5 to 7 minutes about how AI Center works with the industries. And for me, it's a brief overview on what companies need to look at when they are thinking about implementing AI technology to their company. And it's not so different from what an earlier session speaker talked about, which would be like look at your problems and try to manage what is your goal in the company so you can strategize that way. Okay, next please. See, technology is hard. Okay, so today I invited two of my colleagues. One is Ramesh. He is our senior software engineer and is working with us for many, many years. I will not say how many years. And then Wisdud, who is on board with us for a few years now, but he focuses on the front end, which is the and developing of the mobile application and web development, which he of course has to deal more with user design and user experience, and then he will give his input on. In the end, whatever AI we develop, we need to know who the users are. Next. Okay, so what we're gonna go over quite quickly is, a little bit about AI Center. I'll be very brief. And then I'm gonna talk about how to put an idea into a plan, right? And then Ramesh will take over and he will talk about project management. And Visit will talk about users' impact on design and interface. Thank you. So AI Center has been working for about 2 years. Actually, we have been a lab called another lab called Vision Lab, which focused more on video analytics. But that lasts for about 10 years. And then we decided that, okay, we don't only work on video analytics. Actually, we worked on machine learning, deep learning, and natural language processing. And we developed applications. So we decided to change the name to AI Center. And that's what makes us who we are today. But our main core three activity is software development, consulting and testing services, and also AI center, AI training, which actually you have seen some of our partners spoke earlier today in the morning session. So we have we are very happy to work with industry players from all around the world. So the first thing I think I've learned like working in AI center that it's, and maybe it doesn't matter where you work, but is the first listen to the problem, right? So we are now working on a research project called AI in a box, right? Which is basically developing a system where the processing of AI processing is done in the camera and data is sent through to a cloud service via 4G internet. So this system came, like this idea, this solution came from a problem that exists in Thailand, which is kind of infrastructure problem. We have internet everywhere in Thailand, but when we talk about public infrastructure where internet cable lines are running across the city all around, suddenly it breaks and then data cannot be sent. So then we thought and we listened to the problem. The need is still there. So we develop a solution to solve this problem. And I think in your companies, you really need to think, what is the problem that you're having? Either it's wasting money, low efficiency, uh, get back services is bad, these are the kind of problems you need to kind of categorize, and then you can see what kind of AI solution you can develop to fix these problems. Next, please. Okay. So in AIT, we focus a lot with working with other teams in AIT, and then a lot of the problems is related, not the problem. What we want to develop is a smart life, right? What we call a smart life, where we kind of develop maybe smart cities with traffic management and safe roads, where Thailand was like the worst road accident in the world. We want to improve that. So we deploy systems in Phuket to reduce that. And now we're, I think, ranked 10 places lower. So we're no longer number one in the Phuket as the worst car accident, road accident in the world. But I mean, there's also kind of human behavior that needs to be adjusted. But for the first part, our AI has worked to improve a lot of the road safeties. And we can use other things like CCTV or, as mentioned, and I think you've seen with KBTG Talk, to kind of help take care of the elderly people, right? Because we have an aging population problem, and the elderly people need constant watching. But as we know, we cannot be there all the time to take care of them. So we hope that with some kind of technology, we can take care of them even remotely. And then whenever there's kind of emergency, we'll be told to go and help them immediately. And another partner, as you saw, is managing the environment. We know where the pollution is coming from, what are the major sources, and how to manage those issues. So developing the database, managing the big data, and having the AI model to know how to handle it in the future, right? We might know the present, but with AI, we can even predict what will happen in the future. Okay, so I think one thing when we develop AI, we tend to forget about the users. We just think about solving the problem. But in the end, if you don't understand who the users are, whatever problem that you're trying to solve, the users will not use it. And we have seen this happen because we have developed many working technology for Thailand and many companies. But at that time, we were not aware that the users are different from the people we are negotiating with. So when we develop some kind of solution, this is many years back. Um, the the users, when they get a hold of it, they just say it's too difficult. No, it's not easy enough. We are not okay with this, right? So then it's very important for us as AI Center to understand the gap between the people who want to develop their goal, who want to fix the problem, and the actual users who will be the people who using this, right? So when you plan for AI, you you have to have an expected outcome that's very clear, and you have to know what are the inputs that you need, right? So then when sometimes we get customers that want this outcome, but they don't know any of the inputs that they would need. And then when you ask, okay, we can help you find what those inputs are, but there's no data available. So actually it's very difficult to develop that model kind of thing. Okay. And then for me, it's so important that companies develop benefit analysis. So you know the cost and then you kind of estimate the return, even if it's monetary, not monetary, right? You can estimate some reduce of something, but even measure of happiness from the workers who use some kind of AI system, we should be able to measure that. Okay, if they're happier, they're more productive. If they're happier, they stay with us longer, right? So there's other saving costs that happens there. Next, please. And when we think about what the problem is, right? We tend to just think, okay, solve this problem. But that is the wrong way to strategize with AI. AI is, you see the problem, but what is the goal? What is the end goal you want to reach, right? So here are some samples I wrote down, like what are some end goals that would happen, that you would want. One would be kind of cost reduction, right? That Kevin mentioned earlier, that was the most popular in the timeline of business to reduce costs, right? So you think, where are you wasting money? Maybe some companies wasting money in defects or machine downtime. So those are the kind of thing we can focus on to kind of reduce cost, or even human resource management reduction. Are we spending our HR time, uh, reading resumes, maybe 1,000 resumes, rather than using AI to scan what is the best fit for our company goal, right? And then you can just save their energy to focus on more important, which is like selecting the good candidate and training them to match with our company, right? And I think a big one that AI can really help is reducing redundancy in the office or any work, right? We know that in many companies, they have certain tasks that they use people to do, which can completely be replaced with AI. And the person just looks at the paper and puts like in category A or B, A or B, A or B, which if they have enough information, the AI can take over. And this person who has this knowledge can make more deep, meaningful decisions or have more important tasks in the company that they can focus on rather than just sorting and grouping data. Okay. Optimizing resources, improving flow, and even improving relationship in the office. The AI can help this, right? And people cannot really understand, what do you mean by improving relationship with AI? Well, let's say you have to talk with someone, even in company email, right? But you use NLP, which is natural language processing. Maybe you wrote an angry email, but your AI just automatically, make it softer so we don't have any issue between coworkers. These are kind of very simple things that can happen in the office. And as we know, I mean, I'm sure many of you use Gmail. They already do that for us, where they kind of improve the language as you type in your email. Um, and it can be done for HR, improving relationship in data management. So nobody's like, where's my um, where's my follow up? You don't have this, you don't have that. So it helps make everyone happier in the end. Next, please. Right. So as I mentioned before, you need to really consider the weighted outcome. So actually, AI is not very easy to develop if you don't have an end goal, right? And there should be a plan that is matching your company's strategy, right? And you need to kind of weigh what is the cost and the benefits. So let's say you maybe invested 2 million, but in developing a system to help select temporary hires, right? So you hire, you buy a software that can scan resume for you, and then okay, you know which temporary hire to select, okay? And then you hire those people. But it turns out from this app, your HR team reduced workload about 70% because most of the time they were spending doing that. And then it turns out these temp hires are so good that you didn't need to, you can even hire them full time if their productivity is very good and helps the company overall, right? So those are weighted outcome that we need to be able to calculate and measure so you can plan better for your AI. And I think we talk about the good thing, but I just want to point out some of the obstacles and risks that many companies face that they don't plan for it. But yeah, you need to consider that. Unfortunately, no matter where you go, when you talk about AI, there will be some resistance, right? One is the fear of you're replacing them, right? Their job, you're replacing me. I'm not going to have a job, right? Or what this cannot do better than me, actually. But that is part of your training that you need to bring to your team. That in the end, AI will help, and then you need to, the team need to continue to develop their skills to be able to be in this market, right? Even farmers need technology to farm now, right? So it's not about avoiding the technology. It's about understanding that our mindset that we can improve everything every day, right? And then of course, technical obstacles, something like software, lack of data, lack of hardware. I can tell you now because of the big Bitcoin boom, right? Now it's so hard to get a GPU, so we cannot even make a regular AI model because we cannot get access to a GPU. In the market, the price tripled, right? About triple, right? And I'm sure many of you know this, right? And um, one of the things we face is after completing the software development, everyone thinks it's done, right? Software development is one thing, user experience another, maintenance is another, right? So it's not just uh, going to the grocery store and buying an AI and then okay, we're going to use it. No, right? And then any consulting company will tell you, if you think you're going to pay 50 million baht to just buy an AI system and implement it in your company, it will not work that way, because the moment that the consulting company or whatever company leaves, if your company doesn't adopt to it, you're just wasting money, right? So AI is not just a phase, it's the continued development over the years, right? So don't try to push it too fast, because you'll meet resistance no matter what, okay? And then some of the risk would be, of course, budget is a huge risk, right? Because we didn't plan well, or we plan for ABC, but in the end we want 1, 2, 3, right? It's totally different plan. It will go out of your budget. So stick to your plan. And the market continues to change. As we know, COVID hit, everyone works from home, Zoom, boom, right? Even us now, right? And compatibility. So whenever you decide to implement any software, please make sure what system you're using now is compatible with any kind of software or future updates that you plan to have. And understand that the user skills can improve over time, but don't expect them to be able to, develop AI in the next 3 months, but you can train them slowly to improve. Okay, so these are some of the points that I've learned working with businesses and companies that have kind of very high expectation, but um, over time they need to slowly develop and build into AI, but they can do it, right? If they do it in steps and have a long-term strategy, right? So that's it for me. And my part, I'm gonna throw it over to Ramit. And anybody have some question, feel free to drop it in the box, and then my team will tell me about the questions. And then also for Ramit, you can just pop in the question, he will answer them.
Okay. Thank you, Tina. Thank you so much. So my name is Ramesh Mariku, and I have been working in AI Center for quite some time now. My roles have been changing from lab manager to project manager to senior software engineer. So we have various roles in the lab. So now I'll be talking about project management as per how we do it in the lab for now, and this is mostly from our own experience. So first here in this slide, what I would like to show you is that a lot of the projects that people do, be it AI or anything else, you can see that a lot of them are failed projects, and a huge amount of them are actually imperfect in the sense that they have a lot of features that are new than what they have planned for, and even the original features are excluded. And also there are projects where it is over budget and over time, so which is really a nightmare for most organizations. So the main point here is that the need of the time is actually effective project management. Next slide, please. So you see, in an organization, based on your organizational structure, you may have people who have multiple roles in the same project, as well as you may have people working on different projects at the same time. So it is not an easy task to actually delegate tasks to them. So it is very easy for the process to turn fragile very soon. So in the lab, like we kind of mockingly say that we have moved from fragile to agile. So here we have tried to kind of optimize our resources in a way we can best use the skill of the people, because we have very highly skilled workforce, but they are kind of overloaded with many projects. So we have to carefully fine tune our tasks so that we get the best out of them. Next slide, please. So we have now moved on to embrace ISO 29110 for a few years now, and we are constantly updating our approach of how we use it. Now, if we talk about ISO, a lot of people would say, and I also agree, that we have to do tons of documentation, but we still want to stay agile in the sense that we want to value the working code rather than excessive comprehensible documentation. So in that case, we have kind of come up with something like an ultralight version of ISO 29110, while we keep things that help us to solve our problems, and we don't spend too much time doing things that may not actually have high impact for us. So from project initiation to the project closure, we try to bury ourselves in this process. Next slide, please. So as with any project, I guess the main pain is the clarification of the requirements. Uh, the ones who get the projects in the team may focus mostly on the budget and to keep the organization stable with financial issues. But when it comes to the actual developers, we want the requirements to be very clear. So what happens when the requirements are not clear? It's very obvious. The developer will start to spend too much time trying to, understand the customer's point of view, and then they will put in their own expectations, and then they will devise something that they think the customer may need, and they will have to pray hard to kind of hope that the customer will actually accept what they have created. And more so than not, in the end, when we actually deliver, it's quite a nightmare, because now the customer has a lot of things in their mind and they can see something, so they have a chance that they can make changes as the requirements were not clear in the first place. So then comes back the development team to work again, possibly rework completely on the same requirements, but from the customer's perspective. So the next one is we need to freeze the requirements. If we don't do that, what happens? You're going to get new requirements from the customer as you either deliver them time and again, or even in the end, they will have additional requirements for you because they have now seen something that kind of they understand it and they want more out of it. So we need to actually talk with the customer and sit together and agree on freezing the requirements. But the project management will actually help us to even work in cases when the requirements are not clear. So we'll try to make it more clear along the time. And also, it should also help us when we have newer requirements. So like what we call the change requests. So in those cases, we can kind of work together to actually accept or reject those changes. Next, please. So obviously, we all know that it's very important for the team members to communicate well within the team, but it is also very important, and what we see is lacking, that is, there's a communication gap between the team and the customer. So this is a huge problem because the requirements are not clear and the expectations are not identified. So here, what we need to do, the team first needs to understand what is the pain point of the customer. We cannot just throw our technology at them. So we need to understand what will help them better so that finally they're going to use us. It's no point developing something that stays on the shelf forever. So we need to understand them. Next, it is also important for the customer to understand us because what they may only focus on is their own perspective. And I think that's not enough because they need to understand how we work and what we can do for them. And more often than not, what happens is we have some agreements, but we don't have anything on the paper. So the customer agree on something, maybe it's verbal or through messages, maybe in line, and we don't have any solid full proof of the agreement. So the process like ISO will help us to have documents that would kind of have signed agreements. And also, it is quite the possibility that the team may not want to put forward the risks that they may have analyzed to the customer, fearing that the customer may withdraw the project. But we have to be careful as to what we need to not let them know and what we should let them know, because if something is highly probable, it is better to let the customer know early on so that they don't get surprised and distrust us later. And while every kind of software development process does mention about total involvement of the customer, in practice, actually, the customer really wants to know about the product once it is finished. So they want their hands on the finished product. So in our lab, we try to get more involvement out of the customer so that we have less rework, and also we focus more on what is their real need so that the project can end successfully. So basically, we need to clear the fog on the requirements and on their acceptance so that we make things happen the way they want it. Next slide, please. So the same thing here again, we have to manage the expectations. Now, in this AI age, you see everybody wants to get the system with very high accuracy. So they have very high accuracy expectations. Like for example, if they have a system that is going to detect people intruding into a space, then they may really want like 100% accuracy. But we need to let them know that nothing is 100% accurate. And though we can get to high accuracy in detecting intruders, it is also dependent on things like lighting conditions, the weather conditions, and likewise. So as for the automation aspect, in the manufacturing, the clients may want to have the whole process automated. But what we can see practically is that we may need to have some kind of involvement of the operator in cases when the operator does a better job than the machine, so that we can have a semi-automatic implementation rather than not so robust, fully automated system. So at AI Center, we try to focus a lot on spending time uh, and resources on feasibility study and also practicality study so that we have a better understanding of the customer's needs. And we also, because we work a lot on visual analytics, we have demo applications where we can actually showcase to the customer what is our capabilities so that they can see what we can do for them. Next slide, please. So here is just an overview of what ISO 29110 will help us to actually follow. The basic thing is we need to follow the guidelines. Actually, if we just follow the guidelines as is mentioned by ISO, the project will surely succeed, but it has too many guidelines to follow. So we try to extract what has the highest impact for us, which we see is on the requirement side, we get agreements on the statement of work, what we call, from the client. And on the deployment side, we get agreement on the user acceptance test. Yes, next slide, please. And even though we may have a process in place, please note that it is very essential that we have to monitor it. This is a very important aspect. We have to keep monitoring it time and again. And this is what we call the iterative approach. It is a very simple iterative software life cycle. And in this, we have clearly defined meeting points like a sprint planning, project plan update, and progress status on a timely manner. And also we have certain aspects of the project like risk monitoring, issue tracking, and change request, which is always worked on. And special effect, especially we target the change request. You see, whenever we have a change request, we need to make sure whether we are going to accept it or not. If we don't accept, we have to have a clarification why so, because the customer would need to have that. And if we do accept, we have to also let the customer know that it's going to affect our workflow, it's going to have an effect on the budget, as well as on the timeline. Otherwise, that would be very risky for the current project at hand. Next slide, please. So as an example, using the right tools, we are all aware of it, but we only understand when we have an example, right? So if you have to work a plumbing job and you don't have a tool, you have to use your bare hands and maybe even your teeth. You won't get it done, right? But you just get a spanner and you will see how easy it is. You start to worship the tool. So the tool is very important for us, and we have to have a proper choice of tools. Like here we have project management tools. In the lab, we use Instagram, Google Drive, Asana, and we have communication tools like Line and email, and we have development tools, Git, and deployment tools like Jenkins and Docker. These are just a few of them, and we also have an open mind. We also have an open mind where we try to change the tools as and when necessary. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we are already using ISO process, but we also need to have the right flow. We need to know how the flow information is flowing from one module to the next. Like here's the black arrow shows the timeline. You have to do risk assessment early on. It won't have much impact when you do it later on. So you have to do it before you have your contract so that you are clear what are the risks. And from the contract will flow your statement of work, right? So this is the point where you have to conform with the customer to clarify your requirements. After that, you have to have your team work on the project plan. And then you have this iterative approach of sprint planning where you go on doing all this task assignment as per the skill and tracking the issues that may come by and preparing reports for that. So especially the issues. If you have any issue, you have to manage an issue report to make sure these issues won't occur in the future. Or if it does, then you have some kind of reference. That is very important. And you may also have deliverables time and again so that you have more interaction with the customer. So the aspect I want to show here is the traceability actually. You may have all of this, but when you need it, how easy it is to get to them. So you need to be able to trace each of your core requirements from the point of initiation to the point of delivery. And ISO process will help you that. We have what you call the traceability report. So this helps you while you're working as well as in the future after you have worked on it to get back to the things that you have done. Next slide, please. So it is not just enough to follow the process. It is also essential to actually establish the process so that everybody in the lab or in the organization has to follow it, not just a few people. And it is also very important to follow the process to make sure all the pieces of information and the artifacts fall in place. So the goal of the process is to make the questions disappear. So as an example, in our organization, we had always people ask about, do you know the email of this guy? Do you have his phone number? And then everybody who hears it would try to scramble to find their bits of information to get back to that person. But actually, then we started to think that there must be a better solution than this. We have a very simple contact information system where we put in information about everybody, including the customers, partners, suppliers, and their emergency contact information in case we need it, so that nobody has to ask another question regarding, do you have his email? Do you have her phone number? Do you know this guy? So everything, the question actually disappears. So likewise, in the project management, in the very beginning, you'll have a lot of questions, right? Like, what are the requirements? And when do we need to finish it? Who's gonna do it? How is it done? And who did it? And where is it placed? So all these questions, when they arise, the process will help us to put the artifacts in place so that while we work on the project and anytime in the future, when these questions arise in the mind, you can actually use the process to get to the piece of information that you need very easily. So that is our main goal of using the process and to establish the process so that every one of us have to follow it. Uh, and yes, thank you. That's all from me. And I would like to inform that if anybody, usually whoever is working with us, the customers, as well as any potential customers in the future, you can expect us to actually interact with you amply enough to make sure that when we work together, we will work together to deliver to you what you actually need. Thank you. And I would like to pass it on to my colleague, Mick. Thank you.
Wait, wait a minute. Oh, Ramit, before we go to Wisud, I want to ask you first. So like all the processes that you've talked about earlier, usually in what phase or what area is the customer missing? And that you really wish that they were there, but they just disappeared.
Usually the customer is very active till the point we make a contract. But after that, while we are trying to understand the requirements, because in the contract or the terms of reference, the requirements are somewhat vague because at that
Mm.
point, the customer is not really clear about exactly what they need. So we try to have our statement of work extracted from that contract. And at that point in time, we don't really find someone to kind of clarify it because they would really like us to show them some form of a working prototype or a finished product to get more feedback from them. Yeah, that is the point.
Okay, thank you. And
You're welcome.
I think it's important that from my experience that whatever company we are working with, it's important there is a key point of contact person that our team, like AI Center team, would directly contact this person, and they will be in charge of connecting us with the team that is, helping solve this problem, right? So then that team member is in charge of talking directly to their team members, right? Because it's impossible for two different teams of 10 to talk to each other and get one conclusion, right? So I think that's an important point that you pointed out. Thank you.
Yes, I would like to add to that that we also try to restructure our teams. Like the development team will have to talk with the project manager. The project manager has to talk with the coordinator, and then has to talk with the client. So that chain of command actually helped us to solve the problem because sometimes uh, people do not want to ask questions directly to the client. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Wisut, we are waiting for you. Hello.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, introduce yourself a bit.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Visud Bunatipisit, currently working as a web and mobile application developer at AI Center. Right, so I've been working with AI Center for almost 2 years now. And in this session, I'm going to briefly discuss about the user interface design and its implication. Right, actually, at this point, we mostly talked about AI and process management and what to do to help improving software development, right? You may ask now why it is important to put an effort on designing an interface, right, as we initiate the software development project, right? So please go to the next slide. Yeah, actually, I think my colleague Ramesh already discussed one thing about the things that are not useful, right? Let me ask you a few questions like, what would you do if the software that you have is not useful for you. For example, it might not answer the needs that you have, right? You may throw it away, right, and ignore it completely, right? And then there's no point developing it at the first place, right? So like now, let's assume that you have got a software that might be very useful for you in the future, but somehow it is very difficult to use, right? What would you do about it, right? Maybe most of the users, most of the people might stop using your software and search for alternatives. And if they cannot find any solutions, they might or might not come back to your system. Then again, there's no, I mean, actually, it's a waste of effort putting into the developing something that is not being used, right? So making software with a good user interface is really crucial for any kind of software in the digital world, because the user interface is what the user will be seeing and interacting with your system, right? And that is when, right, we have to consider design, interface design. Right, let's go to the next slide. And interface designing, there are two aspects, right? First is what we call the user experience, or as also known as UX. And the other one is called the user interface, or UI. Somehow these two terms are closely related, right? Sometimes they are being used interchangeably, right? But however, there are some few key points that can tell them apart. Please go to the next slide. Actually, let me start with the user interface, right? Which is the simplest of all, right? User interface is everything that the user see and interact with, right? Actually, screens, touch screens and keyboards or mouse or anything that you touch, anything that you see is all considered as user interface. Even in your car, your steering wheel is also an user interface, right? It's something that you use to interact with the machine or any kind of system, right? But in software development, user interface is a component on the screens that the user can see and interact with. These components include something like links, buttons, navigation bar, text fields, and even the layout or the animations of the application, right? A good UI design helps create a good looking application, which is desirable for the user. Please go to the next slide. Next is the UX, which stands for the user experience. It is the experience that the user has while interacting with the system, right? A good user experience is defined by how easy or how intuitive the system is for the user, right? A good user experience design includes the solutions that answer the needs of the users, as well as making it easy for the user to understand how to use the system. Okay, please go to the next slide. Now let's see how do we, at AI Center, how we create an application with UX and UI in mind, right? Now let's start with simplest form of user interface in the software world, right? Which is the command line interface, right? Every piece of software starts with a simple command line interface like this. Whether it is a database engine or rich web application, it all starts with this kind of simple command line interface, right? One problem with command line interface though, even though everything is working, right? Imagine that you run AI with command line interface, right? Everything is working, we have good models, we have good accuracy, right? But it is very hard to use for the user, right? The user doesn't know how to input. The user have to remember the commands and the arguments that have to be passed into the program, right? It is very difficult to use. How do we solve this problem to let the user more interactable, to make the application more interactable to the user? Next slide, please. At this point, we ask a few questions to the users. right? First thing first, we have to ask the user, what are they trying to do, right? What they want to do, what they want to achieve, what's the goals of developing the software, right? And what's the pain points that they want to solve, right? Is it, if there is some existing solutions, can we make it easier for you so that you can happily use the system? Next slide, please. Okay, so using this example, we found that the purpose of this software is to be able, this piece of application is to be able to list the available software. In this case, it might be AI software running inside some machine, right? Also, the user wants to be able to view the status of each software available to this machine, and maybe control by stopping, restarting the running software, and also with some log outputs, right? That's what the user want to achieve. Next slide, please. Okay, next question is about the pain points, right? What's the pain points that the user have? With this example, we found that the command line interface is too difficult for the user to use, because the user have to remember all the commands and have to understand the flow, right? So once we gather all these answers to the questions we asked, we come together and brainstorm how can we solve these issues that the users have. And once we finalize the answers or the solutions to the questions that the user have, then we come up with the design. Please go to the next slide. We come up with a design that is listing the features that we want to do with the system. At this point, we know that we know what the user wants to do. We know what's the pain point of the user, that the user cannot really use the command line interface. So we came up with a solution that we're going to build a graphical application that helps user to complete the task mentioned, right? Then we quickly sketched a wireframe that roughly indicates how things will look like once the application is implemented, right? In this case, we designed application with 2 columns of text, which represent the name of each software and the status of each software respectively, with another column that contains the control buttons that allows the user to start, stop, restart, and view the log produced by the application, right? And at this point, this is basically UX designing, right? Answering all the questions and try to come up with the solution that the user might have. Okay, please go to the next slide. Now, from the wireframe that we have, how can we go about to transform wireframe into a real application, right? At this point, we also have a little bit of questions that we need answered. Some of the questions are, how can we present the information on the screen, right? How would a user find desired action on the screen, and how to make things appealing to the users, right? At this point, let me focus on the second question, which is can be simplest to answer, right? Other things depends on either the data we want to present or the needs of the customer itself. Okay, please go to the next slide. Okay, from the wireframe, we see that it is very difficult to it's not so clear to differentiate the control buttons from one another, right? In this case, it may lead into the user becoming confused on which button to click on, right? The user will have to read carefully on the text on the button to see what are they going to do, what each button can give the actions they need, right? In this case, we found that replacing the text with the icons, it allows the user to quickly and intuitively knowing each row of each button, right? And with the help of coloring, the colors, the control buttons are now easily distinguishable as well, right? And this is what we call UI designing. Okay, please go to the next slide. Okay, actually, designing a good product, it requires a lot of input from the customer, right? It's not just we developers or designers brainstorming and come up with some idea. We need to know a lot of things that the user needs, right? And at AI Center, we are working with our customers to deliver software that answers their needs, as well as making the software much more friendly to our users and keep improving product as needed. Thank you. That's it for me.
Thank you, Wisud. Yeah, actually, I enjoy listening to that a lot because, you know, I've seen some applications. I don't use too much software, but in some software, well, back in the day, oh, it's so difficult to learn how to use. But nowadays, everything's much more improved because people care about the design and the user experience as they use the application. I mean, there are some applications that are built that I just wonder, did they even consider how the customer will be using it, right? Rather than just thinking we need this function, but yeah, I mean, I've have some apps that I've used and there's no back button. And I literally played with the phone for 5 minutes to understand that you just swipe back to go back. Yeah. So it is a kind of user experience that is not good. But yeah, thank you, Wisit, for your input. And I think now if anybody has any questions or insights they want to share, please feel free. If not, then we can go on to the next session. Yeah. One question. It happened to be, it happens that number 3, it says ethics. So the question that somebody shared is that, how will we handle ethics in AI? Well, I am not sure about other people in the industry, but at AI Center, we, we are very, I, I would say ethical, but when we collect data, that is the main point that can go morally wrong, I would say. So we focus on collecting data that is correct and with permission, and we do not just share without permission from the data owner, or even if there's images of people in the data set, we need to ask permission from them as well. And what happened is that our team is actually being trained in what is called in Thailand PDPA, right, which is personal privacy and data protection laws that are being applied in Thailand. And so we really focus on using that and following those guidelines. Yeah. Ramin, how about you as an engineer?
Yeah, I would like to add to that that we try to do projects that are ethical, which is towards the well-being of the people, and we don't try to get projects which we could do, but which would kind of be harmful for the people. So that, I think, is one aspect of ethics for us.
Wizard, any input from you for how about design part? Any ethical concern? No, no concern. Yeah, he follows protocol. I think in AI Center, we have quite strict protocols on how data is being managed, and what we can do with the data is quite restricted. If the data is collected for a certain project, it only can be used for that project. If any other project wants to use the same data set, they need to go through extensive permission and documentation to be able to use that data set. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, so Professor Matt has mentioned that in the last session, of course, they will talk more about the ethics issue in the discussion panels and the bright and dark side of AI, as you can for sure foresee that AI has its dark side and it's been used for many things in the deep dark net. So any more input for today? No? Okay, then I would like to thank Ramesh and Visud for helping me today.
Sure. Thank you, Tina and the team, for allowing us this opportunity to showcase our project management skills.
Thank you very much too.
Oh, how do you know that your model is the final model?
In software modeling, at least for AI models, there is nothing called the final model. Every model has its own accuracy, and it is kind of like an iterative approach to improve your model. The more data that you have, the better it gets, yes, but we also have to fine tune our feature sets or the way we use it to get the best out of the model. So yeah, there's nothing like the final model. Like I just mentioned, there's nothing like 100%. There are always some chance of failure. Some things that that was not there in the data in the first place will never be able to be used properly, and it'll just be a guesswork based on what the model has learned. So yeah, there's no final model at all. It's just the best working model for the time being. Thank you.
I think that's a good point because most of the time when we plan for AI software, we discuss ahead of time that okay, for this time frame it's this much, right? And in the future we are not sure what the potential may be, right? So actually whatever model we develop, we develop for updates and other future potentials as well, right? So those are the kind of things that companies and business also need to consider, that an AI model is not like a 1 to 10 stop. Actually, it's 1 to 2.5 to 3.5 to maybe 100, right? You can even just see Facebook and Windows, right? How many updates they have per year even, right? Any other interesting questions? Misud, how about you? How do you know it's a final model?
Final model as in?
Yeah, for Misud, it's never final. There's always
No.
update for mobile. Yeah. So yeah, I think if there's no other questions, we can continue on to the next discussion. If you guys want to stay on and be part of the discussion, feel free. If you're very busy, you can go back to
Sure.
work.
Thank you.